She is hurting more than you think because of your silence, not because you cheated, but because you disappeared emotionally. You stopped explaining yourself. You withdrew. You gave her nothing to work with, so her mind did the work instead. And what it created was a storm of self-doubt, fear, and blame. Your silence didn't give her peace. It gave her confusion. Comment below. Silence is power, if this speaks to you. Number 1. Silence feels like rejection. When you stop speaking, she doesn't interpret it as you needing time to think. She takes it as proof that she no longer holds a place in your priority system. And while you tell yourself that silence is your way of staying composed, preserving peace, or avoiding making things worse, in her reality, every minute you remain disengaged becomes confirmation that the connection has eroded beyond repair, and the pain she feels intensifies in direct proportion to your detachment, because what you perceive as neutral, she feels as cold and final, like standing outside a locked door she once had the key to, and now no matter how hard she knocks, there's no answer, just quiet that cuts sharper than shouting ever could. And deep down you might not even mean to push her away. You might be overloaded or burned out, or trying to process what's really happening in your own mind. But what you need to understand is that relationships don't run on perfect clarity. They run on presence, and when you deny someone your presence, they stop trusting your words because your absence becomes your loudest message. And she doesn't need you to have all the answers. She just needs to know you haven't abandoned the conversation entirely, and too many people walk around thinking they're being strong by bottling things up, by withdrawing, by not starting drama. But strength isn't passive. Strength is standing in discomfort and still choosing to communicate, even if it's clumsy, even if it's imperfect, because leadership isn't about being right. It's about being real in the moment, where silence is easiest, and speaking anyway. And you might think you're buying yourself time, but what you're really doing is eroding trust. And here's what most don't realize. Silence is not invisible. It's not neutral energy. It's felt like a signal flare going off in the emotional sky that tells the other person, something's wrong, but I won't tell you what. And that message doesn't just float away. It roots itself into the foundation of your dynamic, and every unresolved moment adds pressure to the system until one day something minor triggers an explosion that's not about that one moment. It's about all the others that came before it, the ones that never got voiced, and you sit there thinking, I don't know why she's so upset, but she's not reacting to this moment. She's reacting to everything you left unspoken, the emotional build-up you silently deposited into her heart, like a ticking time capsule you hoped would never open. And men often think their silence is noble, mature, restrained. But in the context of connection, it's often just a way to avoid responsibility, a form of control dressed up as calm, because by not speaking, you control what gets confronted, what doesn't, what lingers, and what dies silently under the weight of avoidance. And people lose good relationships, not because of arguments or even betrayal, but because of erosion, quiet decay disguised as politeness and maturity. And you might be nodding right now thinking, that's me, and still excusing it. But ask yourself this: have you ever been on the other side of that silence? Have you ever texted someone you loved and stared at the screen waiting hours, days, with nothing but your thoughts attacking you in their absence? And yet you still think it's harmless to vanish emotionally just because you're physically present. But there's no such thing as neutral presence in an emotional ecosystem. You're either building certainty or you're feeding confusion. And the most dangerous part is you probably don't even realize how damaging your silence is until she begins matching it. Until you wake up and realize she stopped trying, stopped asking, stopped caring, and now you say she changed. But the truth is, you taught her how to adapt to your absence. You conditioned her to protect herself from your unpredictable quiet. And now the very wall you built to protect yourself is the same wall that keeps you from getting back to her. And you sit there wondering how things got this bad, and the answer is simple. You stopped being emotionally accessible, and the problem is not that you didn't say the right thing, it's that you said nothing at all and gave her no proof that she mattered enough to fight through the discomfort with you, and silence becomes rejection. Not because you say, "I reject you," but because you erase the bridge between your world and hers and leave her walking in circles, trying to find the version of you that used to reach back. And the hardest truth to face is that your silence was never as passive as you told yourself. It was a decision, and the longer you go without speaking, the more permanent that decision feels to her, because people don't stick around forever hoping the quiet will one day become clarity. They eventually believe that no answer is their answer, and that's when something inside them dies. Something you can't revive just by showing up again after weeks of absence and saying, "I needed space," because space without direction is abandonment. And when you choose to say nothing, she doesn't hear patience. She hears the absence of value, the absence of effort, the absence of love, and now you're wondering how to fix it. And the truth is, you don't fix what you refuse to face. And most men never reclaim emotional leadership because they spend more time avoiding their discomfort than building their capacity to navigate it. And if you want to reverse the damage, you don't start with big speeches or perfect words. You start with honest, grounded, simple truth. The kind that doesn't defend or explain, but owns the silence and replaces it with presence. And that's not weakness. That's actual strength. Because it means you stop waiting for comfort to return before you show up again, and you start realizing that presence isn't a feeling, it's a discipline, and that kind of discipline creates safety, and safety builds trust, and trust is what makes relationships not just survive, but thrive. That's why the Stoic relationship blueprint exists, not to entertain, not to sugarcoat, but to hand you the exact mindset and timeless Stoic principles that emotionally grounded, high-value men use to lead relationships with clarity, calm, and unshakable power. And now, it's available in audiobook format, so you can take this life-altering knowledge with you on your walks, during workouts, or while driving through your daily grind. You don't need more confusion. You need a blueprint. So when the emotions hit hard, when your thoughts spiral, when you feel her slipping, you'll have the tools, the mindset, and the map right in your pocket. Tap the link in the comments, secure your copy, and never be left confused in silence again. Number 2, she starts making up stories. You think she's overthinking because she's emotional, but she's overthinking because she's been left to make sense of a reality that doesn't respond back. And while you sit there in silence thinking you're giving space or maintaining peace, she's sitting there creating explanations, because the silence you think is harmless to her feels like abandonment with no warning. And the most powerful part of this dynamic is how predictable it is, and yet how little people acknowledge it. And the reason she's imagining worst-case scenarios isn't because she's dramatic. It's because when people experience uncertainty from those they're emotionally tied to, the brain defaults to protection. And protection always leans negative, because it's safer to expect disappointment than to be blindsided by it. And this means every time you stay silent, she assigns meaning to it. And the longer you stay silent, the darker those meanings get, until the version of you she holds in her mind is no longer the man she fell for, but a shadow who left her in the dark. And the tragedy is, you're not even trying to hurt her, but your inaction gets interpreted as intent, and now you're confused, because all you said was nothing but she's crying and pulling back and getting colder and accusing you of things you didn't do. But what you don't understand is she's not reacting to what you did. She's reacting to what you didn't do, to what you didn't say, to the gaps you left for her to fill with fear and self-doubt and resentment. And now you label her irrational, when the truth is, her behavior is a direct response to your emotional absence. And this is what men don't realize. Women don't need constant attention. They need emotional reliability, and when you disappear without warning, it signals to her that she's not safe in your presence. And not because you hit her or shouted or insulted her, but because she can't trust that you won't leave her hanging when things get tense or uncertain. And this uncertainty is what creates emotional instability in her. It's not just about what happened, it's about not knowing what the hell is going on anymore. And people will always fill confusion with assumptions, so when she doesn't hear from you, she assumes she's being replaced. She assumes she's irritating. She assumes you're slowly pulling back, so she prepares for it emotionally. She gets distant before you can hurt her. She accuses you before she's blindsided. She becomes defensive, and now you think she's just difficult, but she's operating from fear, and she won't tell you she's scared because she doesn't want to look weak or needy, and so she lashes out or withdraws or gets passive-aggressive, and you sit there calling her crazy, not realizing you triggered the entire cycle by not being emotionally present. And this is where Stoic control comes in, not by being emotionless, but by being unshakable, by choosing to lead communication rather than run from it. Because when you learn to lead emotional tone in a relationship, you remove the chaos and you remove the need for assumptions. You anchor the experience and the reason. So many men lose their relationships without cheating, without hitting, without doing anything wrong, is because they don't provide that emotional anchor. They drift. And in that drift, she drowns in imagined conclusions. And you can't fix this by reacting to her reaction. You fix it by changing your pattern. You fix it by being proactive. And here's how. Start stating your emotional status the same way you'd give a location pin to someone you want to meet. You say, I'm overwhelmed, but I'm not checking out. You say, I need space, but I'll update you soon. You don't vanish. You don't leave her hanging. You don't let her imagination drive the narrative, and you don't blame her for filling the silence when you gave her nothing to hold on to, because the truth is, she's not difficult. She's adapting to your uncertainty. And the moment you stop making her guess is the moment she stops building stories that push you further away. And when you become emotionally direct, when you start treating your words like the leadership tool they are, you regain control not over her, but over the trajectory of your connection. And if you refuse to speak, you forfeit the right to complain about how she reacts. Because silence is not a shield, it's a provocation. And the same way a captain doesn't go radio silent in a storm, a partner doesn't disappear and expect loyalty, because people don't stay loyal to confusion. And if you want to reverse the pattern, you must replace ambiguity with clarity. You must stop pretending that doing nothing means you're doing good, and start realizing that leading means stepping into discomfort with direction and emotional precision. And this is where your peace comes from. Not from hiding, but from communicating your position in a way that creates stability, because that's what people trust, and that's what makes her feel safe to stop guessing and start breathing again. Number 3, she starts to question her worth. It always starts quietly, not with a scream or an argument, but with a slow, quiet erosion of self-worth, triggered by the realization that the person she loves is no longer showing up with the same presence and effort. And it doesn't matter if you still pay the bills or show up to dinner. If your emotional energy is absent, she feels it deeper than you think. And what's worse is she doesn't assume you're broken or stressed or thinking deeply. She assumes it's her fault because in the absence of a clear narrative, she makes herself the cause. And now every time you go silent, she replays the last conversation you had, every mistake she made, every moment she felt she might have annoyed you. And she connects dots that were never meant to be connected. And in her mind, you didn't just pull away. You started disappearing piece by piece. And this disappearance doesn't just hurt her, it rewrites her identity. And now she doesn't just miss you. She starts questioning if she ever truly had you. And this is where self-doubt creeps in. She starts asking herself if she's too much or not enough, if she's boring or clingy, if she pushed you away by loving you too hard. And this internal questioning breaks something vital, because once someone stops feeling secure in who they are inside a relationship, they stop feeling safe, being vulnerable. And now she's guarded and hesitant, and you're wondering why she doesn't open up anymore. But the answer is, you stopped giving her reason to believe her voice mattered. And it's not that you insulted her or yelled. It's that you stopped being emotionally available, and availability is not shown through proximity, but through attention, through the ability to say, "I see you," without needing a full conversation. And when you stop showing that presence, she stops believing in the worth of her effort, and this changes her not temporarily but fundamentally. And that's the tragedy, because people can recover from fights, but recovering from a collapse in identity takes years, and now you're noticing she's not as affectionate or expressive, and you interpret it as her falling out of love. But what really happened is she started to believe that loving you too openly gets met with silence and distance. And this teaches her to suppress her needs, to act cool, to stop asking for reassurance. And now she becomes indifferent, and you feel confused, because you don't realize that indifference is learned behavior. It's a survival mechanism, and you taught her by being emotionally unreliable. And now you're trying to bring back the old version of her, but she can't go back, because you let her question herself too long, and now she thinks she's the problem. And if you're not careful, she'll begin healing alone while still in the relationship, and that's when it's already too late. Because once someone decides they're better off keeping their guard up, they stop needing your validation, and when she stops needing it, she stops fighting for you. And if you want to prevent this, you need to break the pattern early. You need to remind her through action and simple, consistent words that her feelings matter, and that your silence is not her failure. And this isn't about coddling. This is about leadership. This is about creating a space where people feel seen. And the moment you stop giving clarity is the moment you lose connection. And you don't repair this with gifts or apologies. You repair it with consistency, with communication, with acknowledging that your silence made her doubt her own worth. And now you must rebuild what you eroded through presence and attention and truth. And if you can't provide that, then you don't deserve the emotional investment she gave you. Because relationships are not built on perfection, they're built on reassurance. And when you stop offering reassurance, she starts offering it to herself. And once she learns how to do that without you, she never needs you the same way again. And you realize too late that your silence didn't just make her angry. It changed the way she sees herself, and changed the way she sees you. And now she doesn't cry. She doesn't complain. She just lets go silently, because you taught her that silence is the language of love. And that's the kind of pain you can't undo with last-minute effort. Number 2. Silence builds boundaries. Not every moment deserves explanation, and not every emotion requires immediate translation, because restraint isn't weakness when it comes from direction and maturity. And there's a reason why boundaries form in the absence of forced communication, because true control doesn't come from being loud, but from mastering the timing of engagement. And silence becomes power when it's rooted in clarity, not avoidance. When the space isn't about manipulation, but about measured intention. Because there's something to be said about people who don't feel the need to respond instantly to every emotional impulse, and silence then becomes less of an escape and more of a filtration system. And it's in that space where people begin to reveal themselves, not just through what they say, but how they respond to stillness. And this is where so many emotionally reactive people expose their own instability, because when someone chooses not to speak immediately, it doesn't mean they've given up. It often means they've stepped back to think with precision, to assess with calm, to not become a slave to emotional chaos. Because the person who can sit with his own thoughts without spilling them recklessly is the one who creates the most mental leverage, and emotional leverage matters more than verbal gymnastics, because when silence comes from a place of grounded presence, it teaches others to rise to that level or fall away, and that's not cruelty, that's sorting. And this is what most don't understand when they call silence toxic or controlling. It's only that way when it's passive-aggressive or cowardly, but when it's decisive and consistent, it becomes a mirror revealing who can truly match your discipline and who thrives on drama. And those who mistake your stillness for disconnection often expose how addicted they are to reaction. And this is why relationships break when one person seeks depth and the other seeks drama. And the moment reactive behavior meets a quiet mind, the one who thrives on dysfunction feels starved, not because they're unloved, but because they're no longer fed chaos, and every unanswered message, every unreturned jab, every unanswered accusation builds not walls of resentment, but walls of clarity. And those walls serve a purpose, because not everyone deserves access to your energy, especially when your energy is built on years of inner work and delayed gratification. And not everybody is entitled to emotional updates just because they demand them in real time, and silence then becomes boundary, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And the more someone tests your silence with provocation, the more their intentions reveal themselves. And if the connection can't survive thoughtful stillness, then it was built on fragile grounds, and silence becomes the audit of emotional maturity. And this is where leadership emerges, because when distance is used intentionally, it forces people to either take accountability or implode in their own narrative. And the person who stays silent doesn't always lose the connection. Sometimes they win their freedom. And it's in that stillness where you learn who respects your peace and who sees your silence as an invitation to invade it. And that's the kind of data words will never reveal, because people can fake their vocabulary, but not their patience. And every time space is introduced, those who cling and lash out instead of introspect reveal their unpreparedness for real intimacy. And this is where selective silence does its most powerful work, because it creates an environment where clarity rises without coercion, and where those who remain do so by choice, not by guilt. And those who leave do so because they can't stand the presence of someone who no longer needs to perform emotional labor on their behalf. And in the end, silence isn't distance, it's distinction. It's what separates the ones who can co-regulate from the ones who require constant drama to feel alive. And choosing silence isn't a punishment, it's a decision to lead with emotional discipline. And when it's done from strength, not fear, it becomes your highest form of communication and your greatest test of alignment. Number 5. She wants to understand you. Desire for understanding often masks a deeper desire for control, and the need to know what someone is thinking every second stems not from love, but from insecurity. And in relationships, this need frequently presents itself as concern, but its real origin is an intolerance for uncertainty. And when someone says, "I just want to understand," what they're often saying is, "I want to make sense of you on my terms." And this becomes a subtle violation when it's not recognized, because not every thought needs to be translated into speech, and not every feeling should be shared to satisfy another's emotional need, because internal clarity doesn't always owe external expression. And the high-value individual doesn't expose every crack in their thinking just to soothe someone else's confusion, especially when that confusion is self-created through expectation, not alignment. And this is the point where silence reclaims its place, not as absence, but as a standard. And those who truly seek understanding don't demand emotional access as a right, but respect it as a privilege. And when that respect is absent, connection becomes suffocation. Because the relationship shifts from being a place of shared growth to a stage where one performs transparency, while the other collects reassurance. And when this pattern sets in, the demand to be understood mutates into a form of emotional policing, and the pressure to constantly explain thoughts, to prove care, becomes exhausting and one-sided. And this is where many people disconnect, not because they don't care, but because they no longer feel free to think in private without being accused of hiding. And there's a difference between being distant and being internal, and if that difference is not respected, the person being pressured retreats further, not to be difficult, but to reclaim sanity. And this is what's rarely spoken about in relationships, where one person confuses constant access with closeness and starts measuring love by how quickly the other can unpack their inner world on demand. But real closeness allows breathing room and respects boundaries. And sometimes the most honest response is silence, because in that pause, there is processing. In that stillness, there is reflection. And for someone grounded in their path, they don't speak until it's worth speaking. And that delay isn't a red flag. It's self-respect. And those who see the pause as rejection are often projecting their fear, not observing your intent. And if understanding is truly the goal, then the method must include patience and trust, not interrogation and pressure. And this is where leadership matters, because emotional leadership is not about being constantly open, it's about being consistently clear. And clarity doesn't always mean disclosure. Sometimes it means boundaries, and those boundaries protect the integrity of the relationship, because when someone feels safe, not being forced to explain, they begin to share voluntarily. And voluntary expression is more powerful than coerced vulnerability. And this is how trust builds, not by dissecting every silence, but by allowing space for autonomy. And when someone can't respect that space, they don't deserve access to the clarity it eventually brings. And if someone starts demanding constant emotional explanation without offering the same depth themselves, it's not mutual connection, it's emotional consumption. And the more you give, the more entitled they feel to your internal world. And that's when silence becomes the antidote, because silence removes the addiction to emotional access and forces the other person to sit with their own void. And the ones who grow from it return with understanding, the ones who resent it return with blame. And this is how alignment is tested, not through how someone acts when you speak, but how they behave when you don't. And when communication becomes expected without gratitude, it stops being a gift and starts being a performance. And this is where silence teaches the loudest lesson, that access without appreciation always turns into entitlement. And when someone truly wants to understand, they ask once, they wait, they give space, they listen for what's not being said, instead of forcing answers. And that's when real connection happens, because it's not built on demand, it's built on allowance. And those who honor your silence are the ones worth speaking to. Number 6, control your emotions. Control is not about pretending to be unaffected or putting on a false mask of calmness. It's about being able to sit with your emotions without letting them dictate your behavior. And when someone provokes or tests or demands immediate emotional feedback, the person who remains still is not suppressing. He's mastering, and emotional mastery doesn't look like numbness, it looks like choice. And this is where so many get confused. They think silence is repression, but silence can also be presence. It can be the pause between reaction and response. It can be the space where clarity is born and power is preserved, because not every situation deserves your emotional reaction. Not every accusation earns a reply, and the person who can sit through discomfort without impulsively trying to fix or explain or justify is the one who always walks away with the upper hand. And this is not about manipulating outcomes, it's about maintaining internal order. Because when emotions are unregulated and responses are instant, there is no stability. And without stability, there is no leadership. And leadership starts internally. It starts with refusing to let temporary emotions create permanent damage. And while some believe that expression is always virtuous, the truth is most reactions are ego in disguise. And when someone lashes out or spirals, they're often demanding a reaction, not because they need truth, but because they need power, and silence denies them that power, not by punishing but by refusing to engage in games that lead nowhere. And this is where real strength reveals itself, in the space between the provocation and the decision to engage or not. And that decision separates those who live reactively from those who live with purpose, and for anyone walking the path of emotional discipline. The standard is simple if it costs peace. It's not worth immediate response, and emotional composure becomes the baseline, not just because it's efficient, but because it forces everyone else to rise to that frequency or fall away, and silence then becomes the filter that reveals who is emotionally self-reliant and who is addicted to extracting energy from others. And the ones who crumble in the face of silence are often the ones who rely on chaos to feel in control. And when that chaos is denied, they accuse you of being distant or heartless, not realizing that they're projecting their own lack of self-control onto your calm. And this is where neutrality becomes power, not the fake kind that pretends nothing hurts, but the kind that refuses to collapse under the weight of immature expectations. And when communication is required, it is given with precision, not to soothe others, but to lead outcomes. And this means saying less and meaning more. It means withholding response until the timing supports the message, and the message supports the goal. And most importantly, the goal serves your peace, not someone else's emotional agenda. And the discipline to hold emotional space without filling it with apologies or explanations builds credibility. And credibility is the one thing that cannot be faked in real relationships, because anyone can talk but few can anchor. And when composure becomes your foundation, you stop fearing emotional intensity because it no longer controls you. And that's when silence becomes your asset, your shield, your signal to the world that your energy is no longer available on demand. And those who learn to respect that silence stay, and those who need chaos to feel loved leave. And both outcomes serve your growth, because emotional maturity isn't about being liked. It's about being clear, and clarity often begins with knowing when to speak and when to hold your ground. And when composure becomes your standard, emotional reactions lose their grip, and from that moment forward, peace is no longer something you chase, it's something you protect. Number 7, build a life she can't reach. There comes a point where silence stops being misunderstood and starts becoming the clearest message possible, not because it intends to hurt, but because it no longer needs to explain. And when a person begins to build a life rooted in values that rise above emotional chaos, everything changes, and this new standard becomes difficult for others to access, especially those who are used to receiving attention in exchange for volatility. And when the mission becomes growth, silence becomes automatic, because explaining every decision to people who aren't doing the inner work becomes counterproductive, and emotional maturity starts to separate people, not through arguments but through energy. And the person who once craved validation now chooses distance, not out of spite, but because peace becomes more valuable than performance. And this is where silence turns into signal, and the signal says, I'm not here to negotiate my values. I'm not available for emotional bartering. I've moved into a space where direction matters more than drama, and clarity matters more than connection. And most people are not ready for that level of self-possession, so they label it cold. They say it's arrogant, but the truth is, it's disciplined, and not everyone can follow a path that requires this kind of internal structure. And when a person starts waking up focused and finishes each day building towards something real, they no longer respond to emotional bait. They no longer explain their lack of response to chaotic behavior, because the purpose they live by speaks louder than their need to be understood. And now the silence they hold is not uncertain, it's final. and those who used to pull them into confusion with guilt and noise start to feel the absence of power, because they can no longer distract someone who has recalibrated their focus. And those who build this kind of life don't do it to prove anything. They do it because they've tasted what it feels like to live in peace, and they're no longer willing to trade that for temporary affection or emotionally unstable people who demand attention without offering substance. And at this stage, silence is not passive, it's protective, and not everyone deserves access, because the cost of explaining yourself to those who refuse to listen drains the very energy required to sustain your path. And this is where silence says what words never could, that elevation requires separation, and not every connection makes it to the next level, because not every connection was built for the next level, and those who can't align will accuse, and those who can't grow will gossip, and those who feel rejected by your distance will assume they've been wronged. But the truth is, they've been outpaced, and there is no obligation to slow down for people who had the chance to rise with you, but chose comfort instead. And this is what real transformation feels like. It's not glamorous, it's not loud. It's the quiet, unwavering walk toward mastery, and it doesn't require applause. It doesn't need applause. It builds silently. And when people try to reach for the old version of you and find no response, they call it ego. But what they don't realize is that evolution doesn't announce itself. It simply stops responding to things it no longer aligns with, and the relationship they miss is not you. It's the version of you who tolerated the confusion. And now that person is gone, and all that remains is silence. Not from hurt, but from healed clarity. And no closure is needed, because the door was never slammed. It was simply left behind as the mission moved forward. And now explanations feel pointless, because growth explained to the unready always sounds like arrogance. And so the path continues quietly, cleanly, and unapologetically. And for the ones who ask why you never came back, the answer is simple. You outgrew the noise and built a life so valuable, so intentional, so aligned, that not everyone gets access. Not everyone earns the right to witness it. And silence becomes the border, protecting everything that matters now. If you're tired of being silenced, misunderstood, and told to just man up while your peace burns behind closed doors, then the Stoic relationship blueprint is your way out. The path society hopes you never find, because a man who leads himself with calm, clarity, and power is dangerous to everything built on manipulation. This book doesn't beg for your attention. It demands your evolution. It's filled with timeless Stoic principles that will transform how you handle women, emotions, and pressure immediately. And now it's available in audiobook form, so you can walk, jog, drive, and level up in silence. It's linked in the comments, and it's yours forever. If you're done being emotionally disarmed and ready to lead with unshakable control, comment, "No more confusion." Like the video, subscribe, and help more men escape years of regret before it's too late.